Thank you very much, Mr. Krach, for accepting this interview today. It's really my great pleasure to interview you for the show.
Well, thank you so much, Alim. It's my pleasure to be on your show, and I certainly appreciate everything you do.
Mr. Krach, on Friday, the 27th, January 27th, on the day of Holocaust Memorial Day, you reshared your opinion piece regarding the Uyghur genocide. And every year, of course, we know the international community, especially the Jewish community, remembers this horrific events that happened, in 1940s under the Nazi Germany. And it's so important to remember this Holocaust Memorial Day. But what is the significance, you think, on the same day to remember also the ongoing Uyghur genocide? That's it in its 6th year.
Sure. You know, the whole thesis behind Holocaust Day and what we said was never again. And with what Communist China is doing in Xinjiang and elsewhere with Uyghurs and other minority populations in terms of committing genocide, punishable genocide, as defined by the UN. So I think it's really, it's a time to really remember that, and and more than just remember, and more than just talk about it. It's time to do something about it. And those were many of the initiatives when I was Under Secretary of State, and now as the chairman of the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy, we're continuing that. So we are on this cause because it's just horrific.
Do you believe, of course, never again, that came out after the Holocaust, the international community coined the phrase, never again, and never wanted to see another genocide again. But it happened again and again, for example, in Rwanda, in Darfur, and also we have seen in Burma, the Rohingya genocide, and also we're still seeing the ongoing Uyghur genocide. But what does never again, does it really mean anything in the international relations, never again, or it's just a phrase?
Well, it's got to be more than a phrase, Alim. And it's really up to all of society to enforce that. But I think also particularly the United States, the thing that I learned when I was running U.S. economic diplomacy was that, this precious democracy we have and freedoms we have is an unnatural act, because the natural order of things is the bad king, the dictator, and the emperor. And when you have that kind of authoritarian rule, it really lends itself to genocide. So you've got to fight every day for that. And I think, that's why I have so much respect for the U.S. government, and also really the people, because regardless a lot of the drama that's going on in domestic politics, these guys are professional, and we've got to stay on that. But it takes an all of society approach. So that was the whole emphasis in terms of our campaign against the Uyghur genocide. When I went on national TV on July 4th, I went on Kabuto, and the first government official to actually label those human rights atrocities in Xinjiang as genocide. And then, I wrote a letter to all U.S. CEOs and their boards, to all university governing boards, and to all civil society leaders. First of all, alerting them to the fact, because I've been a public company CEO many times, and I've also been chairman of Purdue's Board of Trustees. I didn't know about this. So the first thing is to educate. But the second thing is to do something about it. And that's when I asked them to check their supply chains to make sure it was free from forced labor. And then also asked them to divest from any Chinese companies that facilitate the human rights abuses in Xinjiang.
Yes, and do you believe right now, especially when you were Deputy Secretary of State, you did issue the business advisory to many American corporations, businesses that are doing business with China, regarding the dangers, the risks of being complicit possibly with Uyghur forced labor and genocide. you just discussed. Do you think that has been very effective?
Well, I think, I think it woke up a lot of boards of directors. And, the way I put it is that it's their moral responsibility and their fiduciary duty to make sure that they do not enable human rights abuses. And, here's what's interesting, is that in April, I penned an article in Fortune magazine, and it said, present your China contingency plan at the next board meeting. And what I see now from prominent U.S. board members, I also see it in Europe and Japan, that they are developing China contingency plans because what they see is the genocide that Xi is committing. They see he's cracking down on the private sector. They see that he's amped up aggression with Taiwan and the potential for an invasion, and they're creating contingency plans. And they, a lot of these companies experienced pulling out of Russia and losing hundreds of billions of dollars with bloody, unprovoked invasion. And so they don't want to have it happen again because it'd be, 20x. So it's being discussed, and a number of corporations are standing up, but we've got a long way to go.
Thank you. And also, during the World Economic Forum, China sent its Vice Premier Liu He. There he made a statement that, the West should basically abandon its Cold War mentality, and China is now open for business. He also held a separate meeting with U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and also discussed about U.S.-China cooperation and even invited her to visit China. So then you see there has been a lot of excitement in the Wall Street. Many corporations, they're like, well, 3 years China lockdown, we can go in, they can come to invest in the U.S., we can go to China to invest. Now, back to business. We're going to have business as usual. You see a lot of excitement. So how do we read this? Do you think in light of the fact that China is still committing the genocide, and there has been horrible, tragic stories for the past three years because of the COVID-0 lockdown policies, but still many American corporations are ready and willing to go to China and invest just like business as usual. Is this normal?
Well, by the way, the point you make is really a great one. One of the big things we're doing is we're shining the light of transparency on China. And by the way, what that also means is we've got to shine the light of transparency on ourselves. And you brought up the World Economic Forum that I've been going to for 20 years. I think back in 1999, I was awarded their Technology Pioneer Award or something like that. And think about it. This is the premier gathering of governments and corporations along the lines of social responsibility. And before I wrote that last year's op-ed, I went through that website backwards and forwards, and it's a complicated, all-inclusive website, and I couldn't find anywhere any mention of Uyghurs, anything on the genocide in Xinjiang. And, with that, I'll tell you what that shows is that shows that they're conflicted. And, China's strategy is seduce with money and reinforce with intimidation and retaliation. Here you have that prominent form, and all about talking about human rights, and they don't even mention it. Now, that's kind of hypocritical. You brought up Wall Street. We just finished a case study on ESG and solar, and how 90% of the solar business is being manufactured in Xinjiang with the two biggest unregulated coal powered plants in the world, and also with Uyghur slave labor. And one of the things we talk about in that case study is a company like BlackRock, which has been financing these Chinese companies that perpetuate the surveillance state and perpetuate, enabling genocide. And so we're doing our best to shine the light on these companies, and people are beginning to step. And I really believe the best way to affect it is to ring the cash register over there in Xinjiang, and in all society movement. Yeah, the letters I wrote to the university governing boards, that inspired a young student group called Athena to really create a divestment movement modeled after the apartheid movement in South Africa a number of years ago. And I think it was the head of the Young Republicans and the head of the Young Democrats. And they're getting universities to divest. They just did it at Georgetown. They're there at UCLA, George Washington, a whole number of universities. And that's really what it takes.
And for many Uyghurs, of course, this is genocide has been ongoing for the last 6 years, and the Second World War was over in 6 years' time. But for many of them, there is no end in sight. They do not know how long this is going to last, especially for the Uyghur community in exile. They are not in touch with their loved ones. Many of them have been detained, disappeared, or may have died in Chinese internment camps. So when for them is, they hope to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but they're not seeing. So what do you think the U.S. government or U.S.-led the Western nations should do to end the Uyghur genocide? Of course, the sooner the better. What do you think they should do?
Yeah, well, the first thing I think should happen is, and this is what we did when we built the Clean Network Alliance of Democracies to defeat China's master plan to control 5G, is rally and unify the like-minded nations, because that is a very, very powerful voice. And you've seen countries like the Czech Republic and like France match our position in terms of declaring it punishable genocide. So, that's the first step. The other key thing is you've got to leverage the innovation and the resources of the private sector. And there's a tremendous amount of pressure, and we're continuing to put it on, for these corporations using forced labor in their supply chains. And, there's legal implications for those companies, and there's also reputational implications for those companies. So the business side is key. I also think universities are really key, because they, these endowment funds are really big, and putting the pressure on those universities, because they're all about academic freedom and human rights, and so we've got to rally those folks as well. And then I think Congress is beginning to step up in terms of the Uyghur Labor Act and those kind of things. The key thing, though, what I learned in government is once these bills get signed off, it all comes around the implementation. And that's where, every citizen's got to, keep the pressure on in terms of the implementation of these laws.
Thank you very much, Mr. Krak, for your time.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.